Hi students, welcome back to this channel English Literature with Irdam. In this video, I'm going to share some viewpoints on one of the most amazing and attractive topic in English literature, and that is the war and its consequence and impact on the literature. So, because currently the USA and Iran war is ongoing. So we see that how this war is not limited up to the battleground, but it has the direct impact on human psyche, on human identity, culture, language, and ethnicity. Also, it is directly impacting on the environment, our ecosystem, and also it is causing a forceful change in the literature, the theme, the style. So, because our literature has been evolved due to the various events in the history, and wars are in the forefront. Due to the wars, our major portion of literature has been transformed, changed, and developed. And around 60 to 70% of our literature is about the war, its consequences, its impact on human psyche. So in this video, I'm going to share some ideas that how different age spans, the different timelines have impacted the society, or the wars have forced the society to change their thinking patterns, just in the way we see during the World War First and Second. Also, how the writers are somewhere the active participant of that war, or the active observer of that war, and also noting every experience of the war into your writing. So I hope that you would continue listen this whole conversation and get something out of this all lecture. So without wasting our time, let us begin. As we all know that the Norman conquest happened in 1066. So there was Norman conquest, a war that changed the whole scenario, and we see that the earlier language and culture was quite, it was Latin, and later on the French Revolution, where the French uh, replaced it, and then the Norman conquer the world, and the Britain, and then they invade throughout the Britain, and then they bring with them the French and the Middle English. And we see that due to this Norman conquest in 1066, the language and the culture changed. And after that, a book was compiled, that is a Doomsday Book. So that Doomsday Book was actually about the administrative control, but it is also equally significant for the cultural and the linguistic transformation. So we see that the major war fought in 1066 between the Angles and the Normans was the major cause for the cultural and linguistic transformation of that society. Though various other wars also have been fought and happened before the 1066, but I'm just roughly starting from the Norman conquest, which was happened in the 1066. So we see that The transformation which happened after the Norman conquest, and it changed the whole English literature. So it was not the governance that shaped the English literature, but it was the conflict that happened in 1066. So we see that war in literature functions as a historical rupture, because our history is filled with the war, its experiences. Also, the war creates a kind of psychological crisis, and also it's a catalyst for new literary forms. Because earlier we see that the poetry was the dominant form, but later on we see the novels, the poetries, uh, different forms of the poetries. Also see the essays. We also see the short stories, and we also see the dramas and the plays. So due to the war, various things in the society have been changed, and also in literature we see a whole new literary transformation and literary um, innovation. So this way we see that from medieval romance to the modernist fragmentation and the dystopian fiction, wars have continuously redefined what the literature says, how it says, and why it exists. So war is not limited up to the battleground as I earlier said that, but it has the direct consequence on each and everything. Currently, we Indian have been suffered due to the ongoing Iran and USA war. Though we don't have any direct participation and intervention into this war, because we don't want any kind of war. We love the peace, prosperity, and the brotherhood. But this war has deliberately and somehow forcefully and indirectly has shown the consequences on every society, every nation, including India. So we see that the historical wars have such consequences on every society. They have consequences and impacts on the global level. So let us see the different wars in the chronologically, and we would see your causes of happening, their impacts, and the writers who are associated directly or indirectly to those wars. And would also see that how the literature not only reflects war, but critiques, resists, and the reimagines. For the first major war we see is Hundred Year War, which was happened between the 1337 to 1453. And we see that in 1360 or 62 and in 1380 also, there is a major transformation in the English language. And this Hundred-Year War is foundational because it marks the emergence of English as a literary language. Because this is the time when we see that major writers like Geoffrey Chaucer, they were functional, they were writing their experiences. Also, the William Langlet later joins him. So this war, during this war, we see that there are various transformations happened, and this war is not just about kings. It reflects the collapse of feudalism, which we see in the writing of Geoffrey Chaucer. We also see the rise of early capitalism. We see the capital class in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tale, and the birth of the national identity. We see in the Canterbury Tales and the stories of Knight. In 1348, we also see the Black Death, and that has intensified the social mobility, class resentment, and it also questions the authority. So during this 100-year war, we see the major transformations. and also we see the Black Death, and they have directly changed the social standard of the living. They have directly impacted on the society and the culture, the language and ethnicity. They also impacted on the people's identity, their livelihoods. And we see that during this time, the Geoffrey Chaucer was alive. He was functional writing, and his contemporary tale becomes a social microcosm of the post-war England. And in this book, we see that the 29, the roughly 29, um, people are on a pilgrimage to St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury. And on the way upward, they narrate two stories, and also they are proposed to narrate two stories on the downward. But though this book is incomplete, so your stories are also incomplete. But in this book, we see that there are three kind of societies. One is chivalry, other is capitalist, and the third is the laborer or the working class or the peasants. So in this book, there is a character that's called Knight, and who represents the fading chivalric ideal shaped by crusades and the wars. And this Knight has the experience. He has the experience of various wars in the history, and he has fought personally those all wars. Then we have the Miller, who is belonging to the middle class, and as the wife of Bath. They both represent the middle class vices. And we see that how their characters are corrupt, how their ideology is different than others, and how they are struggling for the survival, or they are disloyal to the society just because of the survival. And this way we see that war destabilizes the hierarchy. And Geoffrey Chaucer reflects this polyphonic society into his the contemporary tale. The various other books, like the Legend of Good Women, also the Book of Duchess, and various other books like Trials and Cresside, Geoffrey Chaucer has mirrored the that time society. But in contemporary tale, we see that Geoffrey Chaucer has highlighted the polyphonic society, a society which is multiplied and which has the varieties, which has the diversity. There are the higher classes, the lower classes, middle classes. And we see the William Langland writings also, as he inspires the plowman, critiques the corruption in church and the state. And we see that after the war, how the churches are corrupt, or the states are corrupt, or there is the religious and political absurdity. And it reflects the post-war economic suffering. Because of the survival and economic suffering, everybody becomes corrupt, including the church owners, the state owners, the leaders, the officials, and also the monks, the popes. So this way, the war plagues the society. There are the moral failures, the moral crisis, and literature depicting the wars and its consequences becomes a kind of ethical critique. We also see that the war democratized the literature by shifting it from elite Latin French to the vernacular languages, that is the English. And this we see during the Norman conquest in 1066, where Latin is replaced by the vernacular, that is the Middle English or the French language. After the Hundred Year War, which was ended in 1453, we see the War of the Roses. And these War of the Roses represent the internal fragmentation of the war. It was happened between 1455 to 1487. So this war was again about the legitimacy upon the power. It's essentially about the legitimacy, political instability, and also the collapse of the chivalric order. And this War of the Roses has been well depicted in the writing of Sir Thomas Malory's Morte di Arthur, published in 1485. So in this book, we see there is the fall of King Arthur's kingdom that mirrors the England collapse. We also see the knights betray each other, and this shows that how the chivalry becomes illusion. And we also see that Malory writes from the prison because he has written this Morte di Arthur during the prison days. So this way, literature becomes nostalgic reconstruction of the last ideals. And this Morte di Arthur is well depicted in the writing of Alfred Lord Tennyson also. If you are a student of English literature, please go through that book as well. You would find that how the collapse of the chivalry and the knighthood is actually resembling with the real collapse and the invasion of England. And the more clear picture of the wars is in the writing of Shakespeare's historical plays. For example, in Richard III, Richard is portrayed as a manipulative tyrant. His power is based on the performance and the propaganda. And there we see that for him, the might is right. The power, who has the power, he is always right. So a famous phrase that power corrupts the king is well portrayed and shown in the writing of William Shakespeare's Richard III. And also in Henry VI, we see that Shakespeare depicts chaos, mob violence, weak kingship. For example, in Henry VI, we see the Jack Cate's rebellion, and that is the early representation of the class uprising. And Shakespeare, through such depictions of the rebellion, of the wars, of the violences, and the weak kingships, makes his writing a tool of political memory and the propaganda. He raises a serious concern about the society, about people, or livelihood, their standards, their discourse, their ideology. And he shows a critique of the Elizabethan society. Then next, we have the English Civil War, which was fought between 1642 to 1651, just prior to the Oliver Cromwell's accession or the Puritan age. So in this English Civil War, we see there's a transformation of literature into the ideological weaponry. We see there is a Puritan ideology, there is the spiritualism, there is the faith, renewed faith on the God, on the Christianity, on the Jesus Christ. And this English Civil War actually raises the fundamental questions that who has the authority, whether this authority is with God, king, or people. And it also raises another question that what is freedom? Because due to the wars, nobody is feeling liberal or free. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau also said that man is born free, but he is everywhere in chain. So though for him, the human desires chain the human being, but sometimes wars also chain the human being. Sometimes these wars also imprison the human being into invisible chains. So the loss of freedom and the crisis of the freedom are well shown in the John Milton's Areopagitica, which was written in 1644, and it is about the freedom of press. And in this work, John Milton advocates the freedom of speech, also the resistance to censorship. And it says that because of the different social experiences, the writers write in order to transform the society. But there is a censorship And there is a kind of suppression of the vices. So John Milton says that the writer should be given the full freedom to write, to, to express their views and ideas. And this censorship is very much like in contemporary society. For example, if somebody wants to share his opinions and also the impact of the war on the society, and then the government says that you can't write your ideas and experiences about the impact of society, war on the society. So it is very similar to suppressing the vices or the marginalizing the vices and not giving the freedom of speech or freedom of expression. So this freedom of expression are continuous. The suppression is well shown in the character of Satan, which we would see in the Paradise Lost of the John Milton, that where Satan appears as a rebellious figure, and he says that I would like to be a king in hell than a slave in heaven. So he says that because he is rendered powerless and subordinate, so he doesn't want to live in that society which makes him subordinate. He wants to be the ruler of the society. He wants to be the ruler and the king in the hell, rather be a slave in the heaven. And though Satan appears as a rebellious figure, he mirrors the revolutionary politics that nobody wants to be the subordinate or suppressed or marginalized. Everybody wants to be the powerful, to have the might, the power. And John Milton, through the character of Satan, complicates the rebellion. That is rebellion heroic or dangerous? Because Satan rebels against the God. So he is thrown out of the hell, out of the heaven into the hell. But there is a kind of ambiguity, a complexity, whether his rebelliousness is right or wrong. Is the Satan a moral failure? But the thing is that due to the unintended wars and due to the forceful and deliberated impact of the wars on the society, everybody becomes the rebellion and wants to have the power. Just the way the Satan wants, because he doesn't want to be a slave, a subordinate in the heaven. He wants to rule in the hell. He wants to be the king. So this shows that he wants the power, wants to be the independent, liberal, and the free. And this concern we see in the writing of the Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. For example, he argues that human needs strong authority to avoid chaos. For example, Thomas Hobbes gives the power, the whole social and cultural power to the Leviathan, and depicts that how the power makes somebody to misuse it. So this way, the Thomas Hobbes, through the Leviathan, gives a direct response to the civil war violence. And here, the literature becomes a site of political philosophy and the ideological debate. Next, we see the Crimean War, though I have skipped the few other wars like the French Revolution and others, and I have directly jumped to the Crimean War. So you can go through the other left out wars as well. In Crimean War, which was happened in 1853 to 1856, we see that this Crimean War marks the transition to modern war representation. And Alfred Lord Tennyson, in the Charge of Light Brigade, creates the repetition and the repeated rhythms of galloping horses. In the Charge of Light Brigade, there is a miscommunication between the king and the soldiers, and the war happens. So, Alfred Lord Tennyson glorifies the soldiers but exposes the leadership failure. And here, the war becomes spectacle and the tragedy. And through this war, we see that there is a beginning of media-influenced war narratives. Next, we see the World War First, which was happened in 1914 and 1918, and how the society got completely changed. And then we see there is existential despair, existential crisis, and then various theories like the absurd theory, nihilistic philosophy occurs, emerges after the First World War. And earlier, the war was romanticized, a hero war romanticized. But now the war narrative has been completely changed. And because earlier, for example, during the war happened in Beowulf, the Beowulf is glorified, is appreciated and admired, but all those soldiers who fought with the Beowulf, they were not given the voice. They were not represented. Same we see in the history of India that in Indian independence history, the women also fought for the cause of independence, but their voice were their representation and their participation in the wars was completely overlooked. So in traditional and in the historical perspective, the various chivalric and various knights, the protagonists have given the representation and the voice, but all the other voices are subjugated, suppressed. So that romanticized notion of war has been destroyed during the World War First. And then we see the Wilfred Owen's writing in his Dulls et Decorum Est. For example, we see the gas attack imagery. He and Owen exposes the patriotic lie, and there he shows the sweet and fitting to die. And also the Sigmund Sassoon, who has the satirical tone against the journals. And then the Robert Graves, Goodbye to All That, shows the disillusionment, the loss of faith in institutions. Also, we see the Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. For example, Septimus Warren Smith is a shell-shocked soldier. And we see the psychological impacts in post-war period, and especially in the Septimus Warren Smith, who commits suicide, jumps outside the window. So after First World War, we see there is the birth of modernism. There is the fragmentation, the trauma, and the inner consciousness. And this we see in the works of Virginia Woolf, we see it in the works of T.S. Eliot, we see in the works of Kurt Vonnegut and various other writers. So again, another war was fought between 1936 and 1939, and that's the Spanish Civil War. And in this Spanish Civil War, we see that literature is about the witnessing and the betrayal. For example, the George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia exposes the internal conflict among anti-fascists. And this work leads to, in 1984, where we see the surveillance, the truth control, the suppression of the voices, the surveillance, the biopolitics. We also see the animal farm, the corruption of the revolution. And this way, this Spanish War leads to distrust of ideology itself. We also see this distrust of ideology itself in the Lord of the Flies, where the different characters Simon, Rogers. They also show a kind of corrupt face of the society. Then we have the World War II that was happened between 1939 to 1945. So this World War II raises the darkest questions about the human nature. That is, the human nature is violent. Is the human is for the killing, or torturing, or exploiting the society or the people, human being. And we see this in the William Golding's The Lord of the Flies, where the children become violent, civilization is fragile. We also see the George Orwell, as mentioned earlier, who critiques the totalitarian society, the regimes. Also, we see this totalitarian society, its critique in the Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, Testament, also in The Heart Goes Last, then other Hagseed as well. We see in the writing of T.S. Eliot also, especially in his Wasteland, published in 1922, that represents and mirrors the cultural decay of the society, the spiritual emptiness intensified by war. And also, this way the literature becomes existential and dystopian. So I hope that this all was quite helpful for you. And I am concluding all my conversation and discussion here that across the centuries, war and its experience transformed literature into various stages. For example, in medieval, we see the chivalric idealism that heroes are glorified, they are appreciated and admired, just like Beowulf. In Renaissance, we see that during the war there is a political drama. The War of the Roses happened in the writing of Thomas Malory's Martyr Arthur. Also, we see the War of the Roses. We see in the writing of Christopher Marlowe's Tamburlaine, Richard III, Edward III, I think. Then Shakespeare's The Historical Plays. In Enlightenment, we see the ideological debate whether the war is good, whether the war is bad. In modernism, we see the psychological trauma of the war. And in postmodernism, we see dystopia and the skepticism towards the ideology of the society. Because all these wars happened just because of the social ideology, social understanding. So then postmodern writers, including Jean-Paul Lyotard, Frederick Jameson, they show the skepticism towards the society, towards the social understanding, social experiences, social knowledge, social discourses. And this way, war does three things to literature. It breaks the illusion, myths created by the society, it reveals the truth, and it forces new forms of expression. And this way, in today's world, we see that there is not the war of weapons or the nuclear war, but we see the artificial intelligence warfare, we see the media manipulation warfare, and we see the ideological polarization warfare, the diversity of the ideologies. So these, even the literature produced during the 21st century after the Second World War, shows all these warfares, a new means and trends of the warfare. And these texts are not history, but they are kind of warning. They show that war is always bad, it is violent, it exploits, it tortures the humanity, it gives the traumatic experiences, it fragments the psychology, it gives the psychological crisis. There is the existential despair as well. And we should avoid the wars. And I hope that through these all experience and the opinions and conversations, you understand the wars and their consequences on the society, on the culture, on the language, and literature as well. And what is the role of literature towards the war, and how the literature mirrors the societal impacts and the consequences of the war. And I'm ending it here. Hoping to see you again with another amazing topic. Till then, take care.